Welcome to Mind Love, episode 305. Today's episode is all about the art of expression, how to recognize, accept, and validate your emotions, even when they're a roller coaster.
This life is kind of this absurd drama and mystery, and it is fleeting, right? It's going to end. We are not going to feel this way forever. Whatever you're feeling, it's going to pass. And, it's probably something a lot of other humans, a lot of other people living have felt before. And how can we see that as kind of this beautiful thing, no matter what it is, right? How can we just notice it and just to see it with that kind of appreciation for its mystery and its fleeting nature, I think can soften the edges a little bit. And we can just have this appreciation for the fact that none of these things have to be happening. None of this has to be here, but it is. And it's so full and it's so rich. And, we get to live.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
Are you ready to make some positive changes in your life? Well, hit the subscribe button to join the Mind Love movement. Our community is all about empowering each other, celebrating our wins, and supporting each other through our struggles. And with your help, we can grow even bigger and reach even more people. So hit the subscribe button and consider leaving a 5-star review while you're in there. Today, I would love to share a 5-star review that Mind Love received on Apple Podcasts from Tarla Makoff. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right, but I hope you hear me. It says, 5 minutes in and I can't stop listening. Melissa feels like a best friend you're chatting with over lunch. Within minutes of listening, I was totally hooked and drawn into her personal story sharing. Relatability is so important now, and not everyone has it. Melissa does, and it seems very effortless for her. Such a pleasure to listen to her and how she so flawlessly interacts with her guests. Well, Tarla, this review totally lit up my world, so thank you so much for taking a few moments to write this. Reviews like this mean more than you know, so thank you again. And now it's time for the show. Have you ever been told to just be strong or chin up when you're feeling down? I know I have, and it's kind of weird, right? Like there's some secret rule that says we're supposed to just flip off our emotions after a while. Does society think our feelings come with an expiration date? Like there's some timer for when we should get over it? But from my experience, feelings don't play by these rules. I can't say I remember installing a revolving door in my heart space, but somehow those emotions come and go as they please. And let me tell you, they are terrible house guests. They demand attention or else they start throwing tantrums. Last year, I went through a pretty deep grieving period. I lost my dog of 15 years. And if you're a dog person, you know. He was my first baby, my right-hand dude through all of my crazy years. And losing him was my first true brush with grief, like the gut-wrenching kind, since I figured out the emotional management jig. When I lost my dad, I was still riding the suppression is strength train, and my facade of strength was this mixture of determination and enough vodka to make me forget my own name. It is safe to say I don't remember much of college. When blackouts become the goal, it is time to reassess some life choices. Well, the numbing approach wasn't exactly working, and whenever I had found some moment of clarity, otherwise called sobriety, that loss was right there waiting to be felt. I started to avoid being alone just so I wouldn't fall apart. I felt like I was in the depths of my own despair for probably like 8 years. Well, the Maverick loss was distinct, because initially I assumed it would hit harder than the loss of my dad. Maverick was woven in the fabric of my daily existence in ways that my dad never really was. That first week that Maverick was gone, I was a total wreck. Well, now about a year has passed, and the tears haven't dried up completely, but I am stronger, almost sturdier. 5 years into my post-dad phase, I was still brittle and shattered. However, post-Maverick, I discovered this inner resilience that I didn't really know existed. And I really believe that it all boiled down to how I decided to perceive my emotions. When I was resisting them, I was internalizing all kinds of messages like crying equals weakness. You should be over this by now. Why can't you just pull yourself together? It's no wonder that I spent most of those years spiraling into deep depression and self-destruction. Post Maverick, my internal voice was so much kinder. I embraced the tears. I even welcomed them. I knew how deep my love for that little guy was, so of course my grief was going to be just as deep. And I knew that these emotions needed to be experienced to heal, to move forward. So, yes, my bouts of crying might have reached a new intensity, but they did serve a purpose. They pushed me through the pain, almost propelling my transformation. Well, the problem is, our culture has so deeply embedded an almost toxic emotional strength that we find it almost impossible to open our hearts and embrace our real feelings. So, how do we bridge that gap? Today, we're talking about how to create a safe space for our emotions. And we're going to find the strength within the willingness to be truly and beautifully human. Our guest is Chelsea Harvey Garner, author of A Pity Party is Still a Party, a feel-good guide to feeling bad. 3 key things we will learn are how to recognize a shame spiral and how we can get out of it, the benefits of expanding our emotional vocabulary, and why we should let emotions cloud our thinking. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up or text the word morning to 33777. And now let's welcome Chelsea Harvey Garner to the show.
Right. Hi. Thanks
So-
so much for having me.
What inspired your book on basically being a safe space for all of us criers?
I mean, I think the obvious answer is I've always cried a lot. But it's not just crying that I've done. I've always just felt things really deeply. And I grew up in the Midwest, and I felt like that was a kind of something people didn't understand. It was always treated with like a little bit of a suspicious attitude, or, I was often like regarded as a bit of almost a troublemaker, because not only would I feel things, but I was like, I'm not going to hide this. And I just felt like, the further I got into the field of mental health, the more I heard others expressing a similar experience.
Yeah, I've always been a deep feeler. And it's interesting because in my adulthood, the evolution of this it's just changed a lot, because I didn't always identify as that, because I wouldn't identify with what I was doing in my private time. I identified with what I showed the world. And what I showed the world for a lot of years was hiding all of that. And so I really believed that I was easygoing. Things didn't really get to me, even though I was spending so many nights like crying hysterically over a bowl of ice cream.
Yeah.
And when I finally found, it was like more the warm embrace of myself and probably my husband too, somebody who would accept my emotions. Then it became the unraveling of who I actually was and actually figuring myself out. And now I just kind of own it. I'm like, I feel deeply. I might cry within the first 15 seconds of a TikTok video. I don't know. I don't know what today has in store.
Right. I love that. And I love to hear that you found that with your husband, because I do think it's often a relational space where we discover our authentic emotion. And I felt lucky that, I touch on this in the book, even though I had a lot of really difficult experiences as a child. I was raised by my grandmother, who was very emotionally available and very non-shaming. And I felt like that the older I get, actually, the kind of rarer that I realized that was for me to grow up in an environment where I was just allowed to emote.
Yeah. And growing up, I thought that's what I had. And my mom did her very best, I believe. But now that I can see everything clearly, I know that she didn't really have that growing up. And so she took a step forward and tried to create that for me. And also, I think she still viewed negative, I'm doing air quote, emotions, harder emotions, as emotions to fix. And I felt that. And so even though, yes, she let me cry and she held me through those things and let me talk about stuff, I could always sense that she needed to fix that. And so then I wanted to fix that and didn't necessarily feel safe, versus now with my husband, we know, like, do you want solutions or support type thing? And sometimes I just
Yes.
need to emote.
Yes. Yeah, I think that it's even pervasive in the field of mental health. Like this idea that my clients often come to me believing that they're going to tell me that we're doing good therapy if they're having fewer negative emotions. And I kind of wish that was true. And on some level, it is true, right? Like there are certain feelings that if you are feeling this, horrifying anxiety every time you go to work or see your partner, like that is a sign that this is probably not a healthy situation for you. But actually, it's more about learning to regulate all of these emotions and move through them, I guess, more quickly and with fewer sort of shame spirals or beliefs about ourselves. And so it's really a deep kind of undoing that has to happen because most of us are repressing to survive and just to function, I think. And so first we have to bring the feelings online and then we have to learn to kind of regulate them and undo this thinking that there's going to be some perfect healed version of us where we don't ever feel bad, right? It's kind of sad when we realize that's not probably going to happen.
I know I had that realization a couple years back, and I was like, oh, my goal is different than I thought it was. But
Yeah.
I know that my listeners, if they've been listening a while, they know emotions are good, they know to feel them. But can you pity party too hard? And if so, what are some of the warning signs that you might be taking it too far?
Yeah. Yeah, I talk about this. I made sure to kind of do a preface at the beginning to talk about, warning signs, because I was afraid of that too. Being a mental health professional, you definitely don't want to encourage people to just kind of overly be accepting of any difficult feeling, right? Because there are certain mental states that are important to take note of, that we should be looking out for and seeking help, that are emergencies, right? The one thing I think that scares me the most when I hear people talking about it is really isolating. So if we are not sharing how we're feeling with anyone, not with a therapist, not with a friend, not with a partner, a family member, that kind of perpetuates a cycle of shame. So we start with whatever the feeling is, and then that isolation tends to exacerbate the feeling and makes us feel ashamed of the feeling. And then we start to worry about being a burden, right? And those are the thoughts that we tend to look for as like some pretty serious red flags toward a mental state that we want to make sure to get out of pretty quickly. Because actually, it's not necessarily the feeling anymore. Then it's the belief that we can't feel it because it's too big, we won't survive it if we start to feel it, right? And then the second thing on that note would be like the numbing out. So if we're not feeling anything anymore, if we're feeling really apathetic, we feel kind of hopeless, like our thoughts start to sound really cynical, like nothing matters, nihilistic. That's also not something we want to, just allow and say that's not necessarily the same thing, right? And then I guess just, not wanting to take any action on certain things, right? Like going along with the numbing out. If we're just kind of not taking care of ourselves in a basic way, we're not eating, we're not, showering, those kinds of things. Like we want to look out for that too.
I recently interviewed someone on the idea of drama addiction, and he talked
Mm.
about how so often we're feeling something and then we'll actually insert things into our
Mhm.
situation to make us feel it more deeply. And how
Mhm.
that's, I, I used to think it was a mode of catharsis, but he said that
Mhm.
a lot of times you're creating your own spiral versus just
Mhm.
allowing yourself to feel what's natural and allow the things to come up that's natural instead of putting on one of
Mhm.
your 5 sad playlists.
Right. Right. I think that's an important distinction too, is like when are we perpetuating an emotion because we believe that it's not like happiness isn't possible for us, right? A lot of people do believe that. And one thing I think is interesting around this like cultural dialogue we're having right now, as people are becoming more aware that certain things are a trauma response, and it's true that we do get addicted to like those highs of emotion. I think it's important to remember that that's not just something that happens to like traumatized or mentally unwell people. That is just kind of human nature, unfortunately. Like we are prone to addiction, and so we can become addicted to trying to feel good all the time. We can become addicted to trying to feel sad all the time. And I think part of the reason that I'm like a defender of the difficult emotions is because I feel like right now we're sort of pathologizing certain kinds of people like, oh, it's a trauma response that I never want to feel safe. And it's like, Yes and no. I mean, that's kind of just some of these things are just universal human fears, universal human tendencies. And I don't want people to feel like they're questioning every single thing that they're doing. Is this an addiction now? Right. I sort of have my clients coming in like that sometimes, like diagnosing themselves with everything is a trauma response.
It's hard to say though, because on one hand, it's like, okay, now people are overusing the word trauma. On another hand, I've read things where it's like trauma can be as small as a dog barking in your face when you're 3. So it's
For
like,
sure.
these things can be created from anywhere. But I like to look at it is to just reflect. When I say this is a trauma response, does that make me feel empowered that now I know how to move through it? Or is that something that I'm clinging to as an excuse to stay where I am?
You know what's funny? We spend so much time feeding our minds, reading books, listening to podcasts, learning new things, but then we grab whatever's convenient to feed our bodies. And I get it. Life is busy, and sometimes a drive-through feels like the only option. But that's why I take Field of Greens. It's a greens powder made with whole organic fruits and vegetables. No extracts, no lab-made stuff, and just 1 scoop a day gives you simple, real nutrition. Field of Greens feeds your body with fruits and vegetables medically chosen to support your heart, vital organs, and immune system. And let me tell you something. Since I started taking it, I've noticed these little changes that show me how nutrient depleted I must have been before. Like the ridges in my nails, gone. My sleep, so much better. And my stomach just feels happy. You know that dreaded afternoon crash that has you reaching for more coffee or sugary snacks? Well, that's not happening for me anymore. When your body is actually nourished, it runs so much better. I've tried other greens powders before, but Field of Greens is genuinely different. The quality is next level and you can taste it. It's become my go-to, especially on those days when my eating isn't exactly Instagram worthy, because we all have those days, right? And here's the thing. They are so confident that you'll love it too, that they offer a 100% money-back guarantee. That's how much they believe in their product. So I got you 15% off your first order and free rush shipping. Visit fieldofgreens.com and use promo code MINDLOVE. That's promo code MINDLOVE at fieldofgreens.com. fieldofgreens.com. I don't know why it took me so long to invest in good bedding. I resisted it for years, but something flipped in me about 3 years ago. And now I'm basically a pillow connoisseur. I've tried them all, and I get weirdly excited about good bedding. Because here's the thing, we spend a third of our lives in bed, and the quality of that time affects literally everything else, which is why I'm so excited to tell you about my latest obsession, Lagoon Sleep Pillows. What sets them apart is their matching system. You take a quick 2-minute quiz about your sleep style and your preferences, and then they match you with your perfect pillow. I was matched with their Otter pillow, and I am so impressed. Lately, I've just needed more support, and this seems to cradle me in all the right places. I'm also low-key obsessed with their travel pillow, which I use for way more than just travel. I actually hug it, use it as leg support, and of course, take it on trips with me. Well, the secret is in their adjustable fill. You can add or remove it to get that perfect alignment for your spine. A study even found that the right supportive pillow can improve sleep quality by 63%. And Lagoon lets you try their matched pillow for 100 nights risk-free. Free returns, no questions asked. Falling asleep has never been easier. I toss and turn less and just wake up feeling refreshed every morning. Go to lagoonsleep.com and take their awesome 2-minute sleep quiz to find your match. Use the code MIND for 15% off your first purchase.
When I say this is a trauma response, does that make me feel empowered that now I know how to move through it? Or is that something that I'm clinging to as an excuse to stay where I am?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, like you said, it's good that I feel like you're saying it's good that people are talking about these things, right? I would rather they be talking about them. But with any kind of idea that permeates through a culture, it starts to lose its texture, right? And it's not that I don't think everything could be qualified as a trauma response, because like you said, trauma is super subjective. I'm certainly not in the business of trying to put a hard definition around what is trauma and what is not. I'm much more philosophical than that. To me, it's like very watery. Like you said, I want people to feel empowered by the knowledge. I want people to feel normalized and like they are not so strange.
One of the things that you bring up in your book that I think is a good point, because I'm sure we've all heard it so many times, is how a lot of times people say, oh, don't let your emotions cloud your thinking. Why is that an unhelpful thing to say?
That drives me kind of nuts, really. I probably shouldn't say that, but I think that that's like speaks to it. For me, the emotion of my experience is such a reliable, sort of guiding force. And I think there's a number of ways that that's problematic. For the first of all, it's just not even, it doesn't make any sense. Like humans are extraordinarily emotional in the sense that emotion is just kind of a really like broad term for something you're feeling in your body. Like it doesn't mean, we're not like we're feeling something. I think 90% of the time we're feeling some kind of emotion because it's just your body taking in information about your environment. It's like, oh, I'm kind of feeling a little bored. Now I'm kind of feeling overwhelmed. And we're always kind of tempering our internal experience based on what's happening. And so it doesn't make sense for people to try to disregard their emotion. It's not possible. You're not going to be able to get to an emotionless state. And I think what bothers me a little more about it is that people who do think they're emotionless and therefore in this culture tend to presume that they are objective or like more logical are often people who are just having an easier experience. And so they are the people whose emotions are maybe a little bit more mild and easier for them to sort of disregard or hide. And often people who come from a culture where that's the norm is to hide emotion. And the idea that that means they're more logical or intelligent is actually so like politically problematic. It basically presumes just automatically that suffering people are like not credible. They're not logical. They're not reasonable, right? And of course, it's been an accusation that's been lobbied against women forever. So, of course, that personally offends me. And yeah, just as a trauma survivor, I've never experienced my emotions as something that make me unable to think critically. They might just in that moment be something I need to deal with, but actually, my emotions often guide me toward the solution.
Yeah, and I can see there are times, for example, when my husband and I maybe get frustrated with each other, and I'll say, I need to walk away and like take a deep breath
Yes.
before I respond. So, yes, there's something to that. But I also see my big emotions help me to be incredibly intuitive, empathetic. I read people so easily.
Mhm.
Whereas I know people that are a little bit more cut off from their emotions, that they don't let themselves feel that, and they miss a lot of the subtle cues around
Yes.
them, at least
Yes.
the ones I know, not speaking for everyone.
Mhm. I think it's so true, and it makes me really sad when I work with people who have years of repressing emotion that they have to unlearn because they have this image of themselves and this ego of like being logical. I can't They feel ashamed of the emotion. But then when they start to uncover it and unpack that history, they realize that some of those emotions were telling them, hey, this situation isn't safe for you, like for a long time, but they didn't feel like they could listen to that information because they didn't regard emotions as trustworthy.
Why do you think it's so important for people to learn to connect to their emotions? What are the consequences of repressing them?
Oh man, so many consequences, I think. But first and foremost, I really just care about people feeling safe within themselves. And I believe that emotions are kind of the intrinsic, like the ground of experience that we're having. So, I mean, thoughts are cool as well. And really, thoughts and emotions are intertwined. They're not actually as separate as we tend to think of them as being. But, the feeling of being alive is kind of, to me, more innate than my cognitive perceptions about what it means for me to be a person. And I want people to really feel comfortable with being alive and being in their experience, whatever that might be. And if we are at war with our emotional experience, we're just at war with our aliveness. We're at war with ourselves, basically, because you can't separate yourself from your emotional states. So it makes me really sad to imagine people sort of moving through their lives without really being present. And when we're not present with our emotions, we also can't really empathize, like you said, deeply with each other. How am I going to be emotionally available to you if I can't even feel what's happening in my own body? right? So for me, it's an ethical issue. Like the more people are in touch with their emotions, the harder it will be for them to be apathetic toward each other or disregard each other's suffering or treat each other with cruelty.
And it's that concept too that has always stuck with me, that the depths of your pain create space for the depths of your happiness. And I remember when I first heard that, it kind of just sounded like a cliche. I'm like, how can that be possible? That's not true.
Mhm.
But then I started to really reflect on my situation. And during the times when I was numbing a lot of those things in whatever ways, whether it was just that I refused to think about it or go there in my psyche, or I was using alcohol or partying or just distraction like social media. And it's true because all of those means of things, unless I was like hyped up on Molly, were not allowing me to feel. And
Yeah.
that was manufactured. So
Yeah.
was it even mine or was it just stealing my
Right.
dopamine from my real life?
That's so good. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. They come together. I think, it's almost automatic. And the more like we become self-aware and really stay with our experience, I notice it instantly. It's like kind of comical at this point. Like I'll feel this surge of joy or this surge of love for a person in my life. And almost instantly I'm like, oh my God, they're going to die someday. I'm going to die someday. Right. And, it's kind of that classic like Buddhist thing about like what makes life so precious is that it's fleeting and that we can't grab it really. And I think, if we allow ourselves to open to both of those things, that's what it really means to be present and intimate with our experience.
So say somebody has been cutting off their emotions for a while.
Right.
And there's so many different reasons for this. It could be, like in my situation, it was a series of traumas that happened later in life, and then I just sort of became numb to it all. But a lot of people are even raised in a household where that's never safe, and so they never even cultivate that connection with themselves. So it's not even something they can come back to. It's something they've got to learn from scratch. So where do we start if we want to regain access to our emotions if we do find ourselves repressing?
I love this question. And I think part of my intuition to write a book was just understanding that it's really nuanced, like it's not going to be a simple answer. And as much as I, as a therapist, believe in mental health care and I want everybody to have access to it, I also know that A, it's not accessible to everyone, and B, in and itself, it's not necessarily a solution to like the level of mental health epidemic we're experiencing, right? 1 hour a week is not going to do that for somebody necessarily. So in the book, I try to cover kind of a range of different considerations, right? Because I think depending on where you're starting, it might be that the hardest thing for you to do is trust another person, in which case, you're going to have to work up to that. You're going to have to start noticing, how can I determine who is a person I should open up to? Because I really believe that we all need like a pretty dynamic support system to be well. And I really am not talking about like one person. I'm talking about like, 5, 6 people you can really be yourself with. And so not everybody's going to have not only that, but the skills to know how to build that. So starting with, I guess, at the most basic, kind of the assumption and the belief that you are safe to be with. Your feelings are safe and your body has your own best interest at heart, right? So just kind of at that really, really basic level, trying to believe that you can trust yourself and that it might be hard and it might take time, but you can trust yourself and your intuition. Because otherwise, how are we going to build social support, right? I have to decide who to trust. There are all these people out here in the world. But once we start to trust ourselves, I would say starting to build that support network and really just being like super resourceful about it. I mean, I am a more the merrier kind of idea person. Like I love therapy, I love support groups, book clubs, going to whatever spiritual center you practice and believe in. I mean, all of the above. Like social media, I think can even be a good space for people, if you suffer from a particular form of disability, finding other people who have that too in a niche like social media space and looking at the comments, just as much as you can, kind of gathering that sense of like, I'm not alone and I can trust myself.
I love how your book lays out a bunch of different ideas, and even just as you did now, because that's how even I create my morning routine, for example. Like I have a list of movement. I have a list of embodiment and mindfulness and whatever, because I know that my moods and energy levels shift day by day, but I want to keep that sacred space. And so, in the same way, especially if you're not used to connecting to your emotions that way, just asking yourself, because people don't realize that is even something that they have at their disposal. Just sit and ask with yourself and see how your body, your mind reacts to what feels safer. Do I want a support group or do I want to start this by myself? And even those little things of, it's like, well, if I don't feel safe in my body, how am I going to start? Well, first, as you just said, tell yourself, I am a safe space. This is safe for me to do.
Yep.
And let it sink in to where you feel that shift. I do that a lot when I realize that I'm maybe doing something to get a response from like my husband or my mom or something like that. Like, what am I picking this fight for? What do I need? What is this primal need that's underneath? Or what am I hoping that he says and he's not? And so I'm going around and creating all this nonsense when it's like, oh, I just need to feel, I need to hear this. Can I give that to myself instead? And so in the same way, if you need to feel like there is a safe space for you to emote, can you just tell yourself that? And can you hear that from yourself? So you're kind of creating that dialogue within you to shift the energy, to make yourself feel more safe and to reassure yourself that you can do this, and then try it.
Yes. Oh, I love so much of what you just said, like that sinking into yourself and feeling it. That's part of why I talk about feelings too, because I can be overly intellectual. And so sometimes I start like immediately making sense of my emotions with words, but then I'm also not feeling it, right? And I think, yeah, I just really care about like access. I care about being inclusive. And I know so many people, and I grew up in environments where people just were kind of coming in with such challenges. Like I never want to imply that like there's this one path that's going to work for everybody, because I feel like it makes a lot of people feel like then it's not for them. I want people to believe there are many paths. And like you said, sometimes it is starting with yourself, and sometimes it is starting with just sitting with yourself or meditating or walking every day. And sometimes it's starting joining a group like right now and today. And I do think we have that impulse, we have that intuition of what we need in our bodies. And I really want people to trust that. I really want people to turn in. And sometimes those feelings are coming from the past. Sometimes it's true. I have a lot of anxiety about certain things that I know are related to something that happened to me like 20 years ago. And I just noticed that. It doesn't mean the feeling is wrong, even if it's something from the past, right? So just getting into ourselves and getting to know ourselves better so that we can follow those cues as they arise.
Yeah, I consider the fact that like even every study that says this is proven effective, whatever it is, whether it's sunlight for energy or this medication or this placebo, it's like this is proven effective because 40% of people experience the benefits or whatever. And it still shows that a percentage of people don't, for whatever reason. Maybe they don't believe that it will and it's actually working against them. Maybe it just doesn't work for them. And so I always consider almost everything that I'm doing, it's like a Rolodex. I do that with my mindsets, like where I'm like, why do I feel so stuck? Can I think of it this way? Can I think of it this way? And I imagine myself just going through a Rolodex of things to tell myself until all of a sudden I feel inspired or energized. And
I love that.
So many people will stop at, the third thing they tried and they're like, this just doesn't work for me. I can't do this. And it's like, well, keep picking things off. You got a whole lifetime ahead of you. Try the third thing, the 17th thing until it really sinks in. And I also like that you mentioned, how is this something that's tied to the past? Because so many of us are told to like tune into ourselves, and it's a difficult thing to do. It's like, well, what's coming up right now? Is this, like we talked about earlier, a potential trauma response? Is this something that's tied to past trauma? Is it a gut feeling? And so how do you get clear if a sensation is gut feeling or if it's tied to past trauma?
Yeah, that definitely has its own chapter in the book. I think it's called Wrong Alarm. Yeah, because I've definitely experienced that. I've been in the presence of, friends and partners who are feeling an intense emotion, and they're like, I can't tell if this is, something that's based on what's happening right now. So the first thing that I would say, again, back to kind of trusting ourselves, is recognizing that even if something is a trauma response, even if it is an emotion that's, rising up based on a historical, like a past experience, that's still trustworthy because it's energy that your body is creating to try to survive. And I think that's beautiful. Personally, that to me, I literally have chills. Like I'm touched. When I remember that, I have an easier time working with it because I can talk to myself in a nicer way, right? Like, okay, body, I'm not sure that the danger that we're experiencing or feeling is actually present right now. But I really appreciate that you want to live, I want to live, we want to live, right? Like that's cool to me. There's something about that that gives me a feeling of hope and belief that like life is good and worth living, is that no matter what, my body really wants to live. And that's part of what anxiety makes me remember. So, starting with that belief can be really helpful. And like you said earlier about, moments when you're having, strong feeling in relationship with your husband, like just giving yourself 10 or 15 minutes to just truly be with yourself and comfort yourself and, regulate. Get back into what we call the window of tolerance, where you do have more access to kind of all your faculties. That's not to say that you're outside of that, that you're not like feeling something valid, but that it is true that, sometimes we are just not in a space where we have access to like all of our faculties in that moment. And so giving it 15 minutes, doing whatever works for you. And then just trying to assess, like, is there a persistence to this danger? That's one thing I look for. Does it continue to come up? Like, is this something that reminds me of something from my past? I often personally ask for perspective from others. Do you think this is an unsafe situation? Does this sound like something I've talked about before? Are you able to see something I'm not, right? And I would only ask that with someone that I was really close to and trusted and who'd known me. But all those things, does this keep coming up?
Yeah, I have an example that in which I went both directions. Like I was letting it get in the way and it was speaking to me and guiding me in a different situation. And that situation was due to a relationship I had, actually a couple, but one primary that had a lot of manipulation and gaslighting. Fast forward a couple of years, I ended up in a relationship with a good guy. I mean, we weren't compatible overall, but I picked a lot of fights. And it took me years after getting out of it and years after healing to be able to really reflect back on that and see how I was pushing somebody away because I was afraid of getting too close. I was afraid of being too vulnerable. Fast forward more years, staying with somebody that everyone thought was awesome, and I just had this inner voice that I'm like, I don't trust anything that's being said right now. There is something underneath this. And I had to sit with myself and ask, like, what is this? Because nobody else is seeing this right now. And the way I was able to guide myself once I had done the work, once I got to know myself, and I had the inner dialogue going for years, I built that relationship with myself. It was really, where is this energy coming from? Is it because I don't deserve something? Or is it because I do deserve something? Is it because I deserve not to be manipulated? I deserve peace and I deserve to, live by my own guidance, that type of thing, versus I don't deserve to be loved, which was previously. And just bringing that up, I felt so guided because I did know my inner voice by then. I did know what those sensations that arose were guiding me to. I could kind of, even now when I speak truth, I get chills versus like, do I feel contracted? Those types of things. And so that took a while though, and it might happen spontaneously on the first time, just being willing to ask yourself those things to feel, but it is that willingness to be able to feel what's going to arise. And if you've been turning that off for years and years, then that might be something that you have to develop a little more over time and just, have patience with yourself while you're doing it.
Absolutely. I mean, gosh. Oh my gosh. Do you edit this? I just said something. I don't know what it was. No, I think that that's one thing too with like this current discourse that I love that people are talking about intuition. I think it's just that people want like an easy answer. And unfortunately, it's usually not that way. And one of the messages that I think sounds really good, but doesn't really apply for most of us, if any of us, is you'll just know. I don't think that is really true most of the time, right? And for those of us like with trauma and like OCD, it's like that doesn't even apply to me at all. You'll just know. No, I won't just know. But at the same time, at some point I do just know. You know what I mean? And so it's like allowing it to just be a process and not putting so much pressure on yourself in one moment. There are certain things that we do just kind of have a feeling about right away, and it lines up with what we think and our history. And most of the time, if it's something important, it's going to take time. And that's like what you said, looking to your body, looking to what others are saying, looking to what your thoughts are telling you, and how is it playing out over time? How persistent is the pattern? That's all amazing stuff. And together, you probably put together a pretty comprehensive and convincing case, and then you felt really clear, right? But it would be kind of, I think, a little mean to ourselves to expect that we would just have that on like a first date. We just often don't have enough data, and that's okay.
It's the same thing as like if you go on a first date with somebody, yeah, you might get a feeling that you're not compatible or whatever, but that's different than like making a bunch of assumptions based on small things. Like these are the shoes he's wearing, so he must come from this or not care about this or whatever it is. And it's like we make those same assumptions about ourselves before we've taken that time to develop a relationship. And I always like to bring it back to like you need to like date yourself. Just like you would get to know somebody that you're just dating, you have to sit there and ask yourself the hard questions. Get clear on those things. We're not just going to know them automatically.
Right. Yes, I love observing myself, and one of my best friends, she's very much a scientist, and the way she talks about herself, and we've both been on the path of like self-growth and healing for 20 some years, and she'll still say things like, well, I seems that I don't want to do that. I'm observing that I am not willing to do that. I keep putting it on my calendar and then I'm not doing it. I notice that I'm not doing it. And I'm like, it's
I
so
love
value
that.
neutral. It's not mean. It's just like, I don't detect a desire to do this because I'm not doing it.
I love that.
So we've got the data. You don't want to do that. It sounds right.
Well, it's just the way that we phrase things. Even when we are like beating ourselves up, I do that with my husband all the time. Like he can really get on himself for not doing the things he needs to do. And I'm like, have compassion with yourself. You look at how your business has grown and you work every single day. It's normal to want to tap out. Like, can you rephrase that? And he will rephrase it. And he's like, thanks, babe. That feels a lot better. But the words that we choose are going to shape our experience. And that's why I love the section of your book where you talk about expanding your emotional vocabulary. I will tell you that I created my word of the week is ennui, so I've been using that. It's now my new favorite word. Can you give us some words to name our experience a little better?
Oh, you mean like some of the refining our pain palette, I think is what that section is. Yeah, like some of my favorites. I think what I mentioned there is angst. I think humiliation is in there. Again, I just love like the texture of it. And I really, at this point, I've gone pretty far toward the like neutral. It's like none of these really necessarily in my mind strike as good or bad anymore. Of course, I'm not going to pretend there aren't some that I really enjoy feeling more, but I guess maybe because I'm a poet, like that was what I started as, I love just getting clearer and clearer on what the experience is and what it feels like, and describing it is such a joy. And it also, research shows it does help us regulate, like when we can put the correct and clear word on something, we get a little bit of psychological distance from it and we don't feel so consumed by it. And that's really, I think, a special thing because we also gain awareness of ourselves and we grow in that breadth of understanding.
I remember reading a study years ago that showed that people with lower education tended to default to the emotions of the words that they knew. And so when they were feeling despair or humiliation, something like that, they would just kind of target right to anger. And so that's why they'd be throwing a fit. That's why they'd be more willing to start a fight in a bus or something like that. And that made so much sense to me because I actually been sharing the word ennui. That's how on top of mind it's been. And I just need to tell the listeners the definition is a feeling of A feeling of listlessness and dissatisfaction arising from a lack of occupation or excitement. And oh my gosh, how often do I feel that? How often am I just like bored, or I feel like I should be doing something else? And so then I just don't feel good in my body, which ends up being reflected in the next thing that I do, maybe snapping at somebody or like being
Yeah.
down. And it's like, well, am I depressed? No, I'm feeling a little bit of ennui right now. And suddenly just having that, then I know like, okay, well then occupy yourself with something meaningful. You know, it like gives you the route to kind of move past it rather than like, I must be depressed and then labeling with something else and kind of clinging to that idea and then creating more of that in your life.
Yeah, that brings me such delight to just hear you say that. I think for me, I really enjoy, and again, like fun is a big value for me. So with all of this, I wanted to help people kind of bring that language of like bringing some pleasure to this. I experience a lot of pleasure by finding those right words, and it's even naming a really challenging experience when I can describe it to myself. I automatically feel a little bit accomplished. I feel like I've grown my understanding of myself, and that just is fun for me. Maybe that's not fun for everybody, but it's really fun for me.
You also brought up something that I think is important to touch on because it goes back to what we talked about in the very beginning about potentially pity partying too hard. You said that it bothers you when people mock people that are crying for help, or that might be like emoting for attention in a way.
Yeah.
Why does that bother you? You said that it bothers you when people mock people that are crying for help, or that might be like emoting for attention in a way. Why does that bother you?
I think it presumes that everyone doesn't need attention, or it implies that attention is like a frivolous thing or it's not a real need. And I guess, in my own background, just having, ties severed with both of my biological parents, like the idea that attention, not receiving attention from them, isn't absolutely devastating. It just feels so mean. It's like, how could someone not kind of see that attention is such a human, it's a universal human need. And I work a lot with teenagers now who, I mean, my specialization is like, bad teenagers and like unconventional families where there's a lot of conflict. I feel such tenderness for people whose needs are really misunderstood and who are sort of pathologized for needing to feel seen and understood and witnessed, because often the people who are kind of accusing others of crying for help or just wanting attention, and that's the thing, just wanting attention, right? Those people are already feeling relatively understood in the world, is my sort of assessment. Like, they don't often walk down the street and have people just assume that they're a bad person or a bad kid based on like their presentation or their whatever attitude. And so wanting people to recognize that need in themselves as innocent, and likewise that it's innocent in others, and it's not something that just some people feel. It's something everyone feels all through our lives. We all need attention. Like, yeah, we need food and shelter, but we won't be well if we don't ever feel like anyone pays attention to who we are or knows us or cares about us.
I remember after my dad died when I was 19, I got a lot of messages about like how I needed to get over this faster. And I can see it both ways because I was pity partying too hard a little bit. I was definitely using it as excuses for different things, but I also didn't know how to move through my emotions. I didn't know how to process it. I was my dad's only child. My parents were divorced, so it felt like it was all on me and that nobody really understood. And in the years following, if I am really honest with myself, I can see how I did cry for help in different ways. Like I would be overly dramatic about different things. A big thing that came up was feeling left out. So if I was left out from a group activity, it felt like the end of the world. Like it felt like I was disappearing in a way. And I would send all these pitiful messages to whoever I felt left me out, like really make them feel bad.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I remember this was at a time I was about 26, and I sent a message to a friend, and I was like emerging on my healing journey. I was in the beginning. I had made some strides, but I wasn't there yet at all. And I was kind of doing that in this situation, feeling left out, sending messages like to make this person feel bad in a way, not knowing I was doing that. But I actually felt bad and was like really wanting like the situation to change and thought I could do it through text message. And she wrote back, I can't take responsibility for your emotions or something like that. And it's something that at the time hit really hard. And then I've kind of, depending on my mood, I can look at it as like, that was pretty messed up. And it also was something that I reflected on for a long period of time and I kind of agree with, and so like it did help me kind of move past and there's like this balance that I try to find when somebody's doing it to me, like when I'm on the other end of that. How can I empathize? Like, what is this need underneath? I came across this reel that I shared that talked about how there's no such thing as being too needy. When somebody's too needy, maybe it's too needy for your current state of mind.
Right.
However, what is that person trying to fill? Like, what bucket is empty? And so, yes, I'm not going to take responsibility for other people's emotions. I'm not going to absorb guilt that somebody tries to put on me, but I do make the extra effort to say, okay, where is this coming from? What need can I see in this person? How can I make this person feel seen and heard, maybe without indulging it in the way that they're currently going about it?
Oh my gosh, you just kind of like laid out the whole shape of all of it, right? It is a balance because, don't get me wrong. There's a real not a soft spot, but in my heart for tough love. Like I really do value the people in my life who, as you were talking, I was thinking about times people have said that to me, one of my oldest friends I've been friends with since I was like 12. He's often, pretty sarcastic in response to my expressions of despair, but he doesn't do it in a way that makes me feel like he's saying that the need isn't okay. He's just like, you're going to be all right, babe. Can I get you some French fries? Right? It's like, you're fine, but I understand that this is happening and it's hard for you. And he also stays with me during that moment. So there's a difference between, accusing someone of making something up and then sort of rejecting them, which is what I think a lot of people feel entitled to do once they decide that someone is just crying for help. They feel justified in sort of just neglecting or rejecting that person's request. There's a big difference between that and just saying, like you said, I may not be available to meet that need for you right now, which is hugely important. Once we start having these open conversations about pain, we need to be able to say no and, respecting the feeling, even if we wouldn't ourselves be feeling it as intensely, just noticing, hey, that's a need. It must be real for you because you're expressing it that way. And I just tend to assume people aren't making things up for no reason. I may not be able to meet it, but there it is, right? So it's a matter of like not shaming someone and trusting that it must be real for them. I may not understand it and I may not be able to resolve it, but I don't need to pathologize it.
I'm reminded of one of the first hardest things I went through. And when I was 17, one of my really close friends, we were kind of a quad of four, my best friend's boyfriend, my boyfriend's best friend, died by suicide. And there was a whole period of that relationship where the crying for help thing was happening. And we were all just getting frustrated and like, why are you doing this? She broke up with him, started dating somebody else, and he would say all these things on the phone, like create these big dramatic things. And we're like, you need to stop. Like, you're kind of tormenting her type thing. So we were dismissing him. And then the worst case scenario happened. And it was something that I regretted for so long. And I just wished I had the tools at that time to be someone who could listen well, who could see through the theatrics into what was underneath. And I think that's something that so many of us are missing because we are constantly making assumptions based on our own experiences about what somebody's doing. And I had been the dramatic person in a breakup before. Like I had done certain things. And so I was just like, oh, he needs to get over that type thing. And it was deeper than we all thought. It was more than we all thought. And so I'm curious, how can we better cultivate our ability to listen well, to actually hear people when they're saying something, to get to the heart of the thing, or even just to be a safe space for that person to come to us?
Yeah. Yes, a really beautiful and very unfortunately common sort of feeling. I myself have lost folks to suicide as well. And you didn't quite ask this, but I do want to make sure to point out here, this is why I see community care as so important, because it is extremely difficult to be, sort of the person that someone who's in that state persistently is like placing a lot of emotional, if someone is really placing a lot of emotional weight on the relationship and they're in that state, that can feel extremely terrifying and stressful, right? And so we all need to focus on building systems of community care so no one person feels responsible for another person's entire life, basically. I don't think any one person should feel that way, right? So we all need to like take responsibility for each other at the collective level, and that's a huge part of what I think we need to do to sort of resolve circumstances like that. So that said, listening well, oh my gosh, there is a section about, the mechanics of listening well in the book around like, of course, try not to be distracted, or if you are distracted, notice it and like state it. My friends and I, we're all just like communication nerds. So at the beginning of every conversation, it's like, here's how much time I have. Here's the circumstance I'm in. If that's the quality of listening that you're okay with, then let's continue this conversation. It's just like the norm now, right? 5-minute warning. Or, if my friend says something and I'm like, oh, I'm noticing that that's a little charged for me. Could we maybe check in for a second about what the nature of the rest of the story is, right? And so these kinds of things you do get better at. But I think, just that's like the nerdy advanced level stuff. But there's also just, again, that like self-care and self-trust piece that actually makes us better listeners. One of the kind of sections of that chapter about listening that the folks who I've shown the book to or who have read it have liked the most is the part about shame spirals. And it's one thing I've noticed a lot in my personal relationships is that people who, for better, it's not their fault, but who have a lot of shame and like they fall into those shame spirals a lot, often do what I call hijacking the interaction. It's like you'll be talking about something that you don't realize is sort of uncomfortable for them. And then almost instantly, it can feel like suddenly now they're upset. This often happens for people who are expressing, hey, something you did upset me or hurt my feelings in some way. And then if the other person kind of doesn't have a lot of self-trust or self-respect, they can personalize that, right? Now, instead of hearing, I hurt this person's feelings, they're hearing, I'm a terrible person. I am the worst. Why are you even friends with me? And then they're starting to kind of unravel, right? And now you're having to take care of them when the entire kind of purpose of the conversation was for you to express a need that wasn't met in the relationship. So I think ironically, like being better to ourselves actually makes us better listeners, because then we don't have to worry so much about whether we're messing up or whether we're look bad or if everybody hates us, right? We can just focus on the other person.
I love that. I'm like immediately thought of like 3 recent instances. And I'm like, yes, must send this clip to this person, this person, and this person. No, no, I should be internalizing it. Where can I improve in that? And one of the things you mentioned in that chapter as well is also about embracing silences. And that was definitely one that I'm like, I can do
Yes.
better. I am a awkward silence filler. I'm trying to be better. Actually, right after I was prepping for this interview, I was in a conversation where I was listening, and if you could hear my mental dialogue, I'm like, silence. No, silence. Just deep breath. Okay, you can do this. Can you? How many seconds have gone by? 0.5. How am I thinking so quickly?
Well, there you go. You think quickly. It's true.
How can we get better at managing silence, though? Like, what are your techniques? Just
Yeah.
breathing through it, or what?
I love shared silence. But then you probably hearing me here, I'm having to stop myself from making all these nonverbal sounds. I had like I have so many friends that are hippies, okay? So we're just gonna talk about like I kind of grew up in an environment where people are just kind of hanging out and cuddling and like rubbing each other's backs. And so it's not even so much silence as much as I'm just really used to kind of like sitting there and being like, God, this food is so good. Like that's a lot of my interactions with my friends. We'll be like, what's the feeling? Oh, yeah. It's not quite humiliation. It's kind of like cringe. It's like, that's the feeling. That's yeah. Like we do a lot of just kind of like free association with words, I would say. And so for me, it's about being in the body again and being kind of like returning to that comfort of just sinking into yourself, even just for a minute. I love to make the environments that I have conversations in as comfortable as possible. I notice that that helps a lot with silence. I call it, well, actually, my friend made up the term moment sauce. It's like, how do we make this moment as delicious as possible? You know, the lighting, the setting, the seating, the music. People are a lot more uncomfortable with silence when the environment's just uncomfortable, like fluorescent lights at an office, right? Who wants to be silent in that space? So I think it's just about like those creature comforts, that kind of animal sense of safety in the body that helps a lot of people just kind of sit with each other and feel the moment.
That makes a lot of sense because those are the situations where I'm actually really good at the silence. It's when I'm with my
Mhm.
hippie friends, and just I had a friend who would always, it was like she was tasting what I was saying. She'd be like,
Oh, that's so
mm,
good.
mm.
Yes.
And it just made me feel okay to just like either keep talking or sit there and right back to her. But
Yes.
it, it's like when I'm thinking of it, as we talked about earlier, the way that you think about something or verbalize something, the words that you give it kind of create or shape your experience with it. And when I'm just thinking of silence, it's like it feels to me like something I need to fill, maybe just
Yeah.
because of the way that I visualized it before. It's like this string that I need to pluck
Mm.
versus creating the space. Or I love that new
Yeah.
phrase that I'm probably going to bring into my life, moment sauce, where it's like your words are not the only thing that you contribute to a conversation.
Oh, that's
Your
good.
energy
Write
is
that
a
down.
huge thing. And so even what I'm exuding, what I'm thinking, what I'm putting off
Mm.
is another way to add to that. And so
Yes.
when somebody's talking, if I'm just thinking about even just the words like embrace or loving kindness or like trying to fill the air with that instead, I think
Mm.
that can change the whole situation for me and make me still feel useful without plucking
God.
that silent string.
I just got chills. That was a poem. Ironically, the words were quite beautiful, actually. Yeah. Exuding, right? Like the state we're in our bodies does actually affect the emotional and physical state of the bodies around us. And that gets a little woo-woo, but there's science there, right? That's been observed. And so taking responsibility for our physical state, allowing ourselves to feel what we're feeling, in a way that people can tell we're at peace with ourselves, we're at home with ourselves, and then they can feel more at home with themselves around us.
So we sort of touched on this when I was deciphering the situation with my friend around like the boundaries of emotion, or when we're dealing with our own emotions versus somebody else's. And you have a whole section about setting our own boundaries, but what are some tips for honoring other people's boundaries when maybe we're coming to them
Oh
with
my
our
gosh.
emotions?
Yeah. I will tell you that chapter was one of the hardest to write because I feel like I have a whole other book that I want to write about that. It's so hard. The conversation about boundaries, honoring them, setting them. Again, it's in my opinion just not a simple answer, right? Honoring other people's boundaries has so much to do with learning to regulate our emotions. And again, learning to regulate our emotions means learning to feel them first. We have to notice them and bring them back. For a lot of us, get in touch with them and then learn to tolerate them and widen our window of tolerance for them, because other people's boundaries are often some of the most challenging experiences we'll have. It's like almost always going to feel to some extent like at least a mild rejection. So normalizing that that's a part of a relationship. Like if we want to have really authentic, very comfortable relationships, we're going to have to expect people we love who love us to set boundaries with us, small boundaries on a near daily basis, right? Like, no, right now I don't have the space to talk about that, or I just don't even physically have the time. And if we don't allow people or allow ourselves that language to freely say no, then we can't really trust the yes, right? Because the more easily we can say no, the more clearly and fully we can say yes. And getting to that place where we're comfortable with hearing no is going to take a little bit of that. It's tolerating the feeling in the body, learning to regulate, having other people who you're like, when I'm in a new relationship, I will call like a couple of my best friends and be like, all right, I know this is going to be hard for a while. If I have to hear no, like, can you guys be available to me in those moments when I don't want to call this person and try to, I want to respect their boundary, but I know it's hard. So give yourself backup.
Well, there's so much goodness that we covered in this because I do think it comes up a lot, but a lot of times, no matter how many times I talk about it, people still have questions because I feel like we are such a society that cuts off from our emotions and I mean, I'm still unraveling it and I feel like I'm pretty good at it. And there's still
Yeah.
moments that I'm like, "Oh man, there was like a black hole there and I skipped right over what I was actually
Yeah.
feeling and started just
Right.
acting instead." And so one of the things you talked about, though, that I found fascinating was the cry diary. How do you create your own cry diary?
Oh my God, I love my cry diary. It's so embarrassing and sad, but it's so fun. Essentially, it's really just recording yourself crying. So, I mean, I just started doing it because I think I was just kind of curious what I looked like, and I cry around so many other people. I was like, well, if I'm going to be doing this in front of a bunch of people, I should probably have some idea what I look like when I'm doing it. So just kind of morbid curiosity. And I would just prop the phone up, on the coffee table and get on, come be on the couch. It's true that it takes a while. Like once you put the camera on, you're probably going to be like, well, now I don't feel like crying anymore. I'm just looking at myself. So I just let it run, and then I can like delete the first 5 or 10 minutes later. But it's just about like having that friendly attitude towards yourself in all of these states. And sometimes when I'm watching it back, it's not like I do it all the time, but I have enough where I'll watch it back, an older one. And I kind of laugh. It's like cute, when a kid is crying and it's like they're so in it, but then they'll get like distracted from their pain and their drama and they'll start be like, eat a snack. And I'll just be like nibbling on a snack. And then I go back to crying. And it's just, I don't know. You just kind of see yourself in a new light when you can tolerate it. And don't get me wrong, like I look at it and I'm like, damn, that's like cringe. I really yeah, there are some people I wouldn't want to show this to, but then it's also fun to just be able to accept yourself, and be like, I don't love that, but here I am.
I actually did that when my dog died. I just wanted to memorialize the moment and I don't go back and like rewatch it, but at that time there was something healing about recording it and then watching it back like later that week and just being like this is a pain I'm going to remember for a long time and that's okay. Like it just helped me to see it in a different way, experience it in a different way. And so I don't know, I think it might do different things for each person, but that's kind of the joy of seeing or the purpose of seeing yourself from a different perspective. But if you were going to give listeners one thing to just focus on this week to embody what they've learned in this episode, what would it be?
If we're going to learn to feel our feelings, we really need to shift our attitude toward them. And so if I could give people the ability when a difficult feeling is coming up to really turn toward it with curiosity and just remember that like this life is kind of this absurd drama and mystery and it is fleeting, right? It's going to end. We are not going to feel this way forever. Whatever you're feeling, it's going to pass. And, it's probably something a lot of other humans, a lot of other people living have felt before. And how can we see that as kind of this beautiful thing, no matter what it is, right? How can we just notice it and, observe it the way we would observe like a really rare mushroom in the wild? Like, here I am feeling this really strange humiliation, at this gas station in upstate New York by myself, and this moment will never happen again. And yet it is also such a human moment and such a universal experience at the same time. And just to see it with that kind of appreciation for its mystery and its fleeting nature, I think can soften the edges a little bit. And we can just have this appreciation for the fact that none of these things have to be happening. None of this has to be here, but it is. And it's so full and it's so rich. And, we get to live.
Yes. And did you also get out of your car to pump gas with your boob out because you were pumping on the way to the gas station and you forgot, and then you got out and your boob was still out? Is that where the humiliation?
Out. It must have been nice out. You obviously didn't like feel cold.
It happens all the time. Also,
Amazing.
I was trying out this new website yesterday called Flow Club or something, not a sponsor, but you like have your camera on and you work for accountability, and it was in a different tab and I forgot and I did the exact same thing.
I have so much respect for that. I'm like a little envious of that level of liberation. That's something to aspire to. Yes.
Oh, and it also happened when I had this very important meeting for a university I was going to speak at. This was last pregnancy,
There
though,
you go.
last baby. Same thing happened. I was like half breastfeeding. Didn't realize the other camera was on, my laptop camera. It was angled down, immediate boob shot. Like so many times. But anyways.
Oh, I love it. Unironically, I think that's activism.
I feel like we needed to end feeling on a high note, so I just
high.
wanted to overshare. But thank you so much for all the wisdom that you brought to this interview, to this conversation, to your book. So for listeners that are interested in connecting with you and finding your book, where's the best place for them to reach you?
I would say I'm most active on Instagram, Chelsea Harvey Garner. But yeah, you can pre-order the book anywhere basically books are sold, and hope to be doing some book tour events around the country. So look out for that.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/305. Your challenge for this week is to turn toward your emotions. This is a really great habit to build because so often we just subconsciously start to numb or distract ourselves or do something else when we are feeling some sort of big emotion. Or we sit there and we replay the narrative that's making us upset. We basically reinforce our victim story. So there's a difference between feeling your emotions and expressing them and allowing them, and creating your own personal mini drama by amplifying them. So the difference is that when we're amplifying them, like I said, we're adding to that story. We're replaying the thing that makes us mad or upset over and over again. We're going through sad songs and rereading our last love letter from the ex we're still in love with. The problem with that is that's how they often get stuck. That's how we create our own little emotional prison inside, and we don't allow it to move through. We're holding on to it. We're building upon it. Expressing it is just sitting with it. Instead of focusing on the story that's making us upset, focus where in the body you're feeling this pain or this sorrow. Where do you feel the movement of energy? And then just hold your focus there. Ask yourself, what does this pain feel like? What am I experiencing? Where do I feel movement? Can I open more to it? Can I ask it questions like, what's in it for me? This is how we get curious and we work with our emotions to transform us. So let me know how it goes. You can reach out to me on Instagram at mindlovemelissa. And if you loved this episode, please consider sharing it by taking a screenshot and tagging Mindlove Melissa and Mindlove Podcast. Also, don't forget to check out the Mindlove membership, where you get a whole backlog of over 100 exclusive Mindlove episodes. You also get masterclasses every month to help bring a little bit more attention to an additional area of your life every single month. So by the end of the year, you've basically rebuilt your life to a life that you love waking up to. That's at mindlove.com/membership. There's also dozens of meditations and other bonuses in there. So mindlove.com/membership. You can find all of my sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.